Hey everyone, today I'm going to be giving you my top 10 most useful MOC building pieces. I just wanted to start off this video by saying all the techniques in front of you aren't actually in my list, they're just the honorable mentions, so they are important pieces, but not quite as important as the pieces that are actually in my list. This list isn't in any particular order. I'm not actually ranking these in this video just for time's sake. I'll just be showing you all 10 of the pieces and maybe showing you an example of how I've used them in a MOC before. First up, we have this piece, the perpendicular double split axle joiner, as it's called on Bricklink, and its piece number is 41678. I've used this piece so many times throughout the last few years when I've really started doing a lot of MOC building, and so I'll show you one of the examples where I've used this piece. This is my MOC Toxic Reaper, and he's not my favorite, but I use this piece right here, if I can get the shoulder plate off, to connect this shoulder plate, which that works really well. This is such an easy piece to use, especially when trying to connect shoulder plates, and I think it really works for this MOC in particular. This piece really is one of my favorite MOC building pieces. It can be used pretty much on any MOC just to connect an armor plate, and it's a really useful piece. Next up, we have the Technic Wedge Belt Wheel, or Pulley Wheel, as I believe it's called on eBay, and its piece number is 4185. This is a very useful piece. Here's one example of how I've used it. Here's a Surge MOC that I did. I used it to put some extra detail on his arms and his legs and just to cover up a lot of space. This piece is very easy to connect. It has 7 connection points, so you can connect it to something and then connect a lot of things to it as well. And so this is definitely one of the most versatile pieces that I have. And if you don't have any, I would suggest you probably need to get them because they're very easy to use and they're definitely one of my favorite types of pieces. And they come in basically every color, and so they can work for almost any MOC that you're building. Next up, we have this Technic Lift Arm Modified Crank Piece, piece number 33299. This is kind of a situational piece, like you might not be able to use it for every single MOC, but it is very useful when you need it. Here's one example of how it can be used. Here's my MOC XT4. As you can see, there's a barrel right here and then a little bit of an axle sticking out. So you can use this modified crank and put the Technic extension right there into the barrel, and then this little piece will fit right into the axle. And so that's just one of the many uses. Now you could use a different piece to bridge that little gap right there, but this piece works a lot better because it just already has everything you need, and it just looks really good, and it kind of rounds off the design. Next up, we have this Technic axle and pin connector hub with one axle. Well, that's kind of a long name. Piece number 27940. This is a very useful piece. I actually didn't have any until about a year ago, and ever since I've really liked using them. This example also comes from XT4. As you can see on his feet, there's 3 long lift arm pieces on each side, and so if you use that piece right there, then it can connect both of those very easily, and then it connects into that little triangle piece with a blue Technic. And so that's just one of the many uses you can use for it, and I also used it right there to connect XT4's head. And so it is a pretty useful piece. Next up is the Technic axle and pin connector hub with one axle, as it's called on Bricklink, piece number 27940. This is a very useful piece in MOC building. Unfortunately, I only have about 8 of them, so I use them very sparingly. Here's one example of how I used it on XT4 again. So I have 2 3 long lift arms on either side, and I needed to connect those, so I put that piece in the middle, and also I gave it a blue Technic to connect into that triangle piece on the bottom of his foot. So that makes the foot very sturdy, and that's just one of the ways I used it. And it works really well. That piece is definitely one of my go-to pieces when MOC building. Next up, we have this axle and pin connector perpendicular split piece, piece number 92967. This is also one of my favorite pieces. This would actually probably go down as number 1 if I were ranking these, just because it is so useful. Here's one example of how I've used it on, yet again, XT4. I used one on each limb to connect the weapon to the joint that connects it to the other arm. That is such an easy way to connect weapons. As you can see, I used it on every single arm, and one extra right there. Also, I used one on the back and one on the stomach. So I used 7 on XT4, so that's probably one reason why I'm running out of those pieces. But there's just a couple of examples of how to use them, and so now on to the next piece. Next up is the axle and pin connector toggle joint smooth, piece number 44. Why it's called toggle joint smooth is because the other version has little teeth on it, and so they're not as smooth. And I believe I only have one example of how I've used this piece. I used it on the back of Surge's legs to connect to this little perpendicular joint, I believe is what that piece is called, and that just connects to the rest of the leg, and so it helps with some structural integrity. But besides that, I don't think I have any other examples of how I've used it, and so now we can move on to the next technique. Next up, we have this Technic axle connector hub with 3 axles, piece number 57585. If you're looking to stock up on this piece, buy basically any 1.0 villain, and they should have around 3 of these. I believe Crowder has 6, so he might be your best bet if you want to stock up on these. I have one example on hand. Here's Core Hunter. As you can see, his claw has 3 fingers. How I accomplished that was just by using that little triangle piece. And so that's just one of the many ways you can use it. And so now on to the next piece. Next up, we have this thin Technic lift arm 1x4. I use these on almost every single one of my MOCs. Here's a quick example on Core Hunter. As you can see, his arm right there has 2 red 1x4 thin lift arms just to connect that ball joint that connects to the forearm. And so that's just such an easy way to make an arm design that works well. And you can use those pieces in so many different ways for the structure of a body, for the arms, for the legs. It doesn't really matter. Whatever you think of, that piece can basically do it. Next up is this Technic connector pin with friction and pinhole, piece number 15100. I had a little bit of trouble finding an example where I used this, because most of the time I use this piece for structural integrity, and so it's buried inside the MOC. But I did eventually find one example on Split Face. Let me raise the camera a little bit. Right there, I connected this little pipe using that piece. Without that connector piece, I wouldn't have been able to connect that pipe as efficiently. And so, as you can see, that's just one example. You can use that piece in so many different other creative ways, but that's just one of the simplest ways to use it. Last but not least, we have the Technic axle 2 long with pin with friction ridges, piece number 18651. I had quite a lot of trouble finding an example for this piece also, because this is another structural piece, and so it's not always visible from the surface. Here's the only example I could think of using that little pin. As you can see, Jawblade has 2 gun arms, and the barrel of each gun can spin, but the tire piece right there can't. So how that's accomplished is obviously by using that little pin piece that is 1/3 pin and 2/3 axle. And so this little part attaches there so it can spin. Then the barrel, or I mean the tire piece connects, and then the barrel, and then it all connects to the arm. And obviously this can still spin. And so that's just how it's accomplished. That's really the only example I could think of. And I know it's not that great, but that's just one way that you could use that piece. Here's all 10 of the pieces that I just listed all together. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like me to post some other videos where I might be ranking these pieces, or where I'm showing you some other very important techniques that I like to use, please let me know in the comments. And I'd also like to hear your personal lists of your favorite Technic pieces. So thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe.